Okay. Good. In today's webinar on the DfE Key Stage 4 performance measures and consultation, we are going to focus on the following aspects. First of all, we'll share with you some official information and the relevant links. Then I'll be giving a brief summary of the curriculum assessment review and the DfE responses regarding languages specifically. We'll look at the impact of accountability measures on curriculum choices. And then David will be delving into depth into the proposed new Progress 8 model and also highlight other aspects of the Key Stage 4 performance measure consultation. We'll cover key points regarding the consultation and also how you can then contribute to the AWL response following today's webinar. And finally, to note that this webinar addresses the Key Stage 4 performance measures part of the consultation, but not the RISE part. That's a separate focus. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an overview of the various reference documents. The first link gets you to the curriculum and assessment review. The second one is highlighting the AWL's press release. And then I've also put in a link to our language learning journal special collection on language education in the curriculum that is particularly focusing on some of the aspects that have been covered by the curriculum and assessment review. The QR code here, through the QR code, you can then also get the presentation recording. But if you have signed up via the ticket Taylor, you will also be getting this sent directly. In a couple of days, we will also send out a special AllNet really focusing on the consultation. This is just an overview of where you find the official information regarding the consultation. So as so often with government consultations, there's the introduction, and then there's a separate website to be clicked in order to find the consultation. And then there are also related documents that is worth reading before the submission of the your responses. It's really important that you respond to the consultation as well. Whilst there will be an AWL response and other organizations will be responding, each response will count as an individual response, and therefore it's important to also have individual responses to these consultations. Okay, now to the curriculum and assessment review. I'm sure that most of you will have fully engaged with those documents, but just to briefly summarize, the government has set out, or not the government, actually the review panel have set out a vision of a rich, broad and innovative curriculum, an inclusive curriculum that aims high for all learners and proposes reduction of GCSE exam time, and have added in a number of cross-curricular elements such as climate, digital, and finance education. We knew from the outset that the review panel was looking at adopted a transformational approach rather than an evolutionary approach, and in their response they confirmed that quite clearly. For us at the Association for Language Learning, what was really important in this kind of vision of rich and broad and innovative curriculum, that languages alongside arts must be an integral part to this vision. And we've articulated that accordingly also in our press release. So the key messages for the languages in the report are very much around the defined content at Key Stage 3 with vocabulary and grammar lists, particularly in French, German, and Spanish. At the conference, I've been several times asked whether or not other languages can be taught. And yes, they can be taught, but they have to base the defined content on models of the French, German, and Spanish. For us, what's really important is that moving forward as an association, we are very keen that the defined content does support but not constrain creativity, innovation, intercultural and global understanding. But these are aspects that we pulled out in our press release, but also have passed on to the DfE in preparation for Key Stage 2 programs of studies. In terms of the GCSE performance measure, the withdrawal of EBAC with immediate effect was announced. We come back to this at a later stage. And there was also a commitment to the new GCSE in languages for French, German, and Spanish. Whilst there have been obviously different views in the pre-meetings around the consultation, overall, the language community agreed that immediate change of the current, the new GCSE would be disadvantageous, partly because people have invested now in setting up this new GCSE, which will be first examined in 2026. And there has also been an invitation for stakeholders to explore the local and regional progression models from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and beyond. So our typical kind of challenges around transition, which we all have recognized. So many of the points around the kind of Key Stage 2 defined content, as well as the transition aspects, have been identified by AWL members, but also many other language colleagues in their responses to the consultation. Can we go to the next page? Yeah. So when the government response, they accepted all the CAR recommendations, but went further by also identifying clearly that there's continued funding for the National Consortium for Language Education and Oak National Academy. Furthermore, they have also made a commitment to exploring alternative qualifications, such as the new flexible stepped language qualifications, based on some of our submissions and suggestions, reflecting the success of asset languages, etc., in previous iterations of language policy and policy implementation. The government has also identified an area of interest in terms of a language learner pipeline, and have committed to explore the issues and potential solutions concerning the language learner pipeline from GCSE to A-level and beyond in collaboration with relevant stakeholders. And last but not least, there's also been an acknowledgement that support may be needed for schools and language teachers in using AI and EdTech to enhance language learning. A particular challenge that has come up for us as an association in from feedback from our members was particularly around the Key Stage 2 curriculum, in terms of whether there will be training for Key Stage 2 and primary teachers. At the moment, the official response is very much focusing on that NCLE could provide such a vehicle, but I think we need to explore that alongside the program of studies when that is announced, what is really required in terms of upskilling for our Key Stage 2 learners. Just a few reflections. So as an association, it's worth highlighting here, first of all, that we have been able to develop a really professional dialogue between the DfE and the language community stakeholders. We have been speaking with one voice, and in many aspects we've been listened to. But there are areas of concern, and obviously the first area we'll be delving in later on today, and that's around the EBAC and Progress 8. We already have heard a number of examples from schools where that withdrawal from EBAC, and as David frequently reminds me, it's not just a withdrawal from EBAC, but actually the changes to the Ofsted inspection framework have led to school leaders developing or creating a new approach to their options choices. And one of the schools, for example, we've heard from, they have seen a decline or will see a decline in September by about 40% of their GCSE cohort. So there are immediate reactions, and that obviously, despite us not yet fully knowing what the Progress 8 will look like, school leaders have already taken steps that may disadvantage language and impact negatively on language uptake. I've alluded to this already. We are very interested that the defined content at KS4 is not stifling innovation and actually allow for the creativity that is happening in many of our partner schools. And we also recognize the absence of home and heritage and community languages as an underpinning feature of the rich, broad and innovative curriculum. And I've already referred to the professional development of teachers. We have the next slide. In terms of, I just want to briefly go back to the kind of Progress 8 and EBAC. So we've already heard that the CAR endorsed Progress 8, but was extremely negative about EBAC. And the DfE has agreed and is ultimately gone with immediate effect. And why has that happened? I think that there are a number of reasons here. One is, without a doubt, a political reason that the EBAC was very much a kind of conservative policy, but also the targets set have not really been met in terms of that increase of uptake at 16 to 19 as a consequence of EBAC as well. And last but not least, as we been in many debates with other subject associations, etc., it was very much perceived as an unnecessary constraining of choice, particularly for the arts and other aspects, and therefore impacted potentially negative on engagement and achievement of the overall cohort. And that was kind of aspects. But, and I've referred to this earlier, that it's not the impact of the EBAC that was a key driver, but actually the Ofsted adoption of it as a key factor in its 2019 framework. And that has, with the new framework, the 2025 framework changed. And in a recent meeting with the Ofsted inspector or lead inspector for languages, she has confirmed this insofar that there is no direct measure in the framework now to look at the uptake of languages. Okay. In terms of the KS4 performance measures now, the government has proposed the revised Progress 8 model, which we'll be looking at in a minute. And ultimately, the aim there is very much that it maintains the academic core. So it's something that we have previously seen. It is aimed to ensure that the breadth and choice of subjects, and it values a wider range of subjects, including the arts. And we look at these when we go through the various kind of slots or the 8 slots that are available. So I'm going to ask now David to join me and explore in much more detail the changes in the accountability and also what changes are introduced or proposed for Progress 8 as well.
Lovely. Thank you, René, for that introduction. Just want to begin with a reminder about the timeline, which is quite complicated. As René said, the EBAC no longer applies. That's immediate effect. This coming June 2026, there will be Attainment 8, the existing one, but no Progress 8 because there was no Key Stage 2 back in 2021. So that's the current year 11. We then have 2 more years, so that's current year 9 and 10, June 27 and June 28, where there will still be the existing Attainment 8 and Progress 8 will come back into play, but under the existing rules for Progress 8. And so the consultation is about making changes that would take effect for the June 2029 exams. That will be a new Attainment 8, which would then lead to the new Progress 8. So that's current year 8, year 7 and onwards from there. So in practice, people can be making decisions in the autumn term coming up, ready for the year 9 options process in spring 2027 to start teaching in September 2027, unless they've got a 3-year Key Stage 4, in which case they need to be amending the choices currently. So there is time to reflect on what's going to happen, but the consultation is taking place over the next month or so, with the closing date on the 4th of May, which is why it's important to be becoming informed and then responding accordingly. But before I want to look at the new Progress 8, I'd just like to have a little history lesson, because I'm aware, so you've got people like Steve and me, we've been around an awful long time, so we have lots of experience, but there are others who may not have lived through some of this. And one of the key things is to look back on previous performance measures and different Ofsted frameworks, and to see how schools responded to the rules. I'm really frustrated that politicians will always criticise us as gaming. My phrase is, this is about schools are optimising according to the rules that are set by government and Ofsted. They're the ones who set the rules, and then it's quite right that schools respond according to those rules. So some of you may remember back in 2006, they introduced contextual value added, very tightly linked to Ofsted outcomes. It was almost whatever your CVA was, that would translate into an Ofsted outcomes. So schools responded by optimising on non-GCSE qualifications, and within 2 or 3 years, the system had imploded. So lots of good intentions, but not thought through as a totality. We then flipped to a focus on raw attainment. So, for example, the percentage C+, back in the old grading days in English and maths, which was deeply unfair on schools which had lower prior attainment, because so much of the output from the school is determined by the prior attainment of the pupils. They also tried talking about expected levels of progress, which weren't actually progress measures. They were linked to attainment because of the way that the levels were judged. Then Michael Gove came along in 2010. He announced the EBAC. He announced it as if it was a qualification, so people felt, that we need to act urgently. And also he set in to train what turned out to be the beginning of the steps for the new GCSEs. Fortunately, his original proposals, ignoring a third of students, got ditched, and we just had the new GCSEs. And then in 2016, Attainment 8 and Progress 8 actually became the live progress measure, but there had been a long lead-in so that people were aware of what was going to come. So that's sort of setting some of the changes that took place. And what I'd now like to do is to look at the GCSE French entries and highlight some of the factors that caused the changes. So going right back to 1988, that's when the national curriculum came in. You had that period where modern languages were deemed to be part of the national curriculum. And then 2004, this application began, and then that's when the numbers sitting GCSE French, and you'll see a very similar pattern in German and Spanish as well, they began to drop quite sharply. Particularly as this was a period when you had the contextual value added, and you were just trying desperately to get as many points as you could for the school. And with all of this, we know that severe grading is around, so that the grades in languages for pupils of similar prior attainment are about a grade down. So you're disadvantaging yourself if languages are being compared against other qualifications. Then, as I said, 2010, 2011, Michael Gove announced the EBAC. There's always a bit of a time lag because the announcement happens, you then have to take it on board in the options, and it's 2 years later that things change. So 2013, there was this spike in language entries, but people had already begun to suss in 2012 that EBAC wasn't a qualification in its own right. So the numbers started to drift back downwards. And then the new Progress 8 was announced 2014, and people realised that because of severe grading, languages were going to be disadvantaged by this measure. So you can see the drop down 2016, 2017, 2018. But then the new 2019 Ofsted framework put a heavy emphasis on what they looked at as an academic curriculum, which coincided with the definition of EBAC, but it was the Ofsted. And if you ask any heads are driven by Ofsted, both as a carrot and as a stick. And schools, and those schools inspected in 2019 immediately started to have the area of development had to be increased the percentage doing modern languages. And so that stick carrot meant that language numbers then stayed very static over the whole period of the 2019 framework. So hopefully that gives you a flavour as to how schools have responded to the incentives that are out there. The other thing before we look at the potential impact of a new measure is to look at what it was before the new Progress 8, and then we can make judgments relative to what it was before that when we're looking at changes from that. So again, if you remember back in 2012, so this was before Progress 8 had been announced. I've got two slides here. The first one is looking at English literature and science. The English literature is the dotted green line, and it at the left-hand side is the percentage of pupils entering each of the subjects as a proportion of those enter for maths, on the grounds that almost everybody gets entered for maths. So that gives you a good starting point. And you can see down the bottom, we're talking about the average Key Stage 2 prior attainment of the students. And what you can see for the level 3 students, so that's the lower prior attainment, is that for English literature, only about 40% of students did English literature. As soon as Michael Gove announced that if you entered English literature, you got double weighting in Progress 8, immediately everybody got entered for English literature. So this massive curriculum shift driven simply by a performance measure. And then it was similar in science. You could do just one science in 2012. You could do core science, and that would be it. But then to fill the EBAC 3 bucket in Progress 8, you had to have 3, and you needed to have the 2 sciences. And you can see that in 2018, almost everybody is doing 2 sciences. It's not possible to do one science because you either have to do combined science or triple science. So again, enormous curriculum shift in the core subjects. So that's a lot of entries going up. What happened in the other subjects? Well, if we look at history and geography, again, back in 2012 for the lower prior attainment, you only had about 15% of students doing history and geography. That's jumped up enormously to 40% or more with the introduction of Progress 8. And I'm highlighting this because some of the people are saying, well, history and geography might slip back, but they will still be well above where they were in 2012. You know, what is the right level of entry for history, geography, etc.? You know, that's out there for debate, but we do need to realise just how much they jumped up in 2014 with the introduction of Progress 8 before coming to some value judgment about the impact of any changes with the new one. But look at French. French is a cyan, and actually, although there's a slight increase for the lower prior attainment, it had a negative impact on the high prior attainment. You can see in 2012, over 50% did French, whereas that had dropped down to under 40% because those students didn't need to do a language to fill the EBAC 3 bucket. It all comes down to this detail about how you fill the buckets or not, but you can see it does have enormous impact on those subject entries. And again, if you've got lots more entries into history and geography, something has to go down. And that was one of the drivers behind the government's manifesto commitment, that they were going to increase the number doing creative subjects. Although, as Becky Francis pointed out, it isn't a uniform drop. Look in the top left-hand corner, you can see that the art and design numbers have actually stayed pretty constant. But there has been a substantial drop in the blue line, which is DT, and in the other ones, which are things like music and drama, etc. So that's where that jump in history has then had a negative impact on the creative subjects. And you see that's illustrated on the right-hand side. We've already looked at languages, geography, history. Computing science has drifted up a little bit above information technology. And then you can also see bottom right that there's been a decline in the numbers doing PE, and again, a bit of a drop in the numbers doing RS, again, partly because of the component of their definition of humanities was only history and geography. It didn't include RS. All of these are things that I'll come back to, but just wanted to give you that background before we look at the potential impact. These are the official EBAC percentages. Bottom is what we've been talking about, that essentially languages, it's about 40% of students are doing a language, and that's all of these have remained pretty constant since 2019 because of that driver from the 2019 Ofsted framework. And where people are not doing all 5 components, nearly always it's the languages is the missing component. So just a reminder for everybody as to how the existing Progress 8 measure operates before we look at what the new one is going to do. So you've got the English bucket, double weighting for your literature, so everybody gets entered for literature. Maths is just double weighted. And then the EBAC 3 bucket, where you need to have filled 3 of those slots from the EBAC subjects, with no constraints within that other than they just have to come from those EBAC subjects. So in practice, most students either do triple science, which fills it completely, or they can do dual science and then history or geography. If they do modern languages as well as those, then it would appear in the open bucket, but schools get disadvantaged because you're being compared to other subjects which are either the other EBAC subjects or other subjects which are more generously graded as well. And that's where the Ofsted change in Ofsted framework is important. We had a very large Surrey Heads conference this morning, and people were just noting that it feels like you've gone back in time to the pre-2019 Ofsted framework, very data driven. You've got massive IDSR, which is the booklet with all the data, and the inspectors are very focused on data and attainment, not the curriculum design. People are now looking hard. And I think the key point was that this was trailed right back last summer. EBAC going was being trailed, but it was a change in the Ofsted framework that was being trailed, which is why it's no surprise that in October, November, particularly when the curriculum review was published and there was nothing in that sort of compelling around languages, that Heads made the decision in time for the option process that's been taking place during the spring term. So that's that background. So this is the new proposed Attainment 8 and Progress 8. So the English and maths slots are staying as is. The doubling with English if you do literature, so that's exactly as is. But there's a major difference in the next slots, which is where languages comes into this. There are now 2 slots for science, so you can fill those either by doing the combined science, which is a 2 science qualification, or take 2 out of the 3 triple science. But it's the breadth one that is the one to to focus on as far as languages are concerned. And then you've got 2 more free choice ones making up to the 8. So the basic structure and calculation in overall terms is staying the same. It's the detail as to how the subdivisions are calculated that has changed. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. Looking at the breadth, so that's slots 5 and 6, you have to do 2 from 2 of humanities, creative and languages. And then the consultation asks about, should there be a 4th category, D, called science? And then 7 and 8, as currently with the open bucket, you can make up with anything else. So it could be your extra English grade, the 3rd science if you've done it. But importantly, under that creative one, and this is a change from what came out in November, you are allowed to count BTQ. So things like BTEC dance, BTEC art and design, etc., are all going to be counted now. That wasn't the case in November, but people have pointed out that it's particularly the creative subjects where the vocational qualifications, BTEC and so on, are particularly appropriate, and significant numbers are taking that. So that's been a welcome change from the DfE. But there is an overall cap of 2 VTQs across all of 5 to 8, which is in line with the government's proposals, that it keeps a strong academic core, but looking for breadth and wanting to promote the creative. Let's look at some examples. So I've just listed it out there. Category A, humanities, that now includes religious studies. So you've got geography, history, religious studies. Creative is art and design, and within that there's a range of things, which could be textiles, photography, etc. But the qualification needs to be art and design brackets something. And it's the same for design and technology. There's a range of things that you can do there, but it's all within the family. And then music, drama and dance. And as I say, you can do BTEC in those, and that will count. And then category C is modern foreign languages and ancient languages. So to give a couple of examples, a pupil could do history from category A and art from category B. That would be 2 from 2 of them. If they also did geography, then they couldn't count it, because they wouldn't be taking from 2 of the 3 categories. It would have to go into the choice 7 and 8 slot. Or for example, you could do music as your creative and do French from category C. And so there's no need for a pupil to do history or geography, even if they're only doing dual combined science, counting as 2 qualifications. So there's opportunities here that perhaps haven't been there previously. Now, there's an important point here about the 4th category. There's a lot of debate here, and it's really important that people respond. And it's worth reading carefully what the DfE have said. The proposal is that there might be a category D, which would enable a 3rd science or computing to go into it. But there's a note in the document that says that if they have a category D, then they'd move design and technology from B to D. And you might be thinking, what's all that about? Well, if you didn't do that, you have to do your 2 from the 2 categories. So you could do DT in B and 3rd science in C. So you wouldn't need to do any creative or language or humanity. And I think that's what's behind the DfE note, that they've said it would allow more choice and specialisation in science, but the government are committed to trying to promote breadth. And they put that extra sentence at the end, which they didn't need to put in. And so I think the very fact they put it in is significant, that they say that most pupils in state-funded schools studying 3 separate sciences already study more than 8 GCSEs. So it's not constraining pupils by not having that 4th category D. So it's quite complex, and I think Julian's just commented in the chat that it does offer sort of opportunities here, that there aren't quite the negative pressures that there were on the previous formulation of Progress 8. So this is just a recapitulation that, as I said, the current definition disincentivises schools because the grade gets counted against subjects which are more generously graded, but we had the whole Ofsted incentive to keep schools wanting to promote languages. And so going back to what it had been before Progress 8, it was history and geography, literature and science whose numbers shot up. So perhaps it matters less if they drop down a little bit in order to give space for modern languages and the creative, a bit more sort of balancing across a wider range of subjects. You know, different people will say whether that's right or wrong, but that is in line with the government's approach of trying to positively promote breadth. Back in November, when this came out, because these proposals came out simultaneously with the curriculum assessment review, Dave Thompson did a really good analysis, but, and this is a big but, at that point, the creative one had to be GCSE. And there are a significant number of students where they do a BTEC as their creative. And so Dave's analysis is a little bit skewed because it doesn't include all of those BTECs. I've been in touch with Dave and he's going to redo the article, taking into account the fact that you can include the BTEC creatives in the slot. And what does Dave say? This is Dave back in November. He shows that actually in terms of Attainment 8, it doesn't make a big difference as far as Progress 8 scores are concerned, but it will have this influence on the subject choices which are being made. And I would very much agree with Dave on that. At that point, he was looking at the consequences of not including the VT2s in the creative subjects. So I've put lines through that because that's no longer the case. It's been superseded because VTQs are allowed for the creative subjects. And as he said, the incentives to enter pupils for geography and history have been reduced. So it wouldn't be surprising if we saw those numbers for geography and history just falling back a little bit. And as Dave said, we'll see a percentage of pupils filling the what he called the group 4, taking a creative or a language. But at least it does something rather than being a disincentive. And I think just picking up something that somebody's put in the chat, there is this whole tension between VTQs and what is seen as the strong academic core, because again the car was a delicately poised balance, and so I don't think there's any chance that VTQs in languages will be allowed, and you'll note that they've imposed that constraint of a maximum of 2 VTQs anyway. So to be honest, I don't think that's something that's likely to happen, but you know, we'll see what emerges out of that. So these are the 3 consultation questions that have been put. I've put exactly what's in the consultation. The nice thing is that you can see that these are very open questions. Sometimes you get consultations where the questions are so very skewed in the way they're framed. They're looking for a particular answer. These are pretty open. The fact that you're allowed to write free text up to 3,000 characters does give the opportunity for people to express their opinions, and those will all get taken into account. At the very end, René will just run through some of the implications of this, but I wanted, for the sake of completeness, just to put in all of the questions in the consultation. Just in case you're wondering why did it start question 11, questions 1 to 10 are just for you to put in your own information to give a context to the answers. This is nothing directly to do with languages, but this is just a little plea from me whilst we're doing this. There's a current situation as far as the banding in performance tables that, depending on your Progress 8, schools get given a colour, and you can go from dark green for well above average, green for above average, amber for average, and it goes down to red if you're below average. But you can see I've ranked those in order of progress 8 score: 0.26, 0.25, 0.21, and 0.2. You may well ask, why on earth are they in different coloured bands, given that the progress 8 scores are just simply decreasing? And that comes from the frankly incorrect way that confidence intervals were used to define these bands. And the DfE are proposing to get rid of that methodology and move to another one. I just urge people to endorse that change, because it shouldn't have come in. It's taken a while to get rid of it, and we need to just move on there. I say that's nothing to do with languages. That's just a personal plea, because it's just an absurdity that punishes some schools. And they're going to probably replace it with percentile ranks, perhaps quintiles into fifths, 20% into each of the coloured bands. There's no right or wrong answer to that, and so your views are welcome. But the main thing is we just get rid of the system that you can get a higher P8 and yet be in a lower band, which is just absurd. Right, back focusing on languages. One of the perhaps quite right concerns is to focus on pupils with low prior attainment, because about a third of those pupils don't actually take 8 qualifications. And the government quite rightly are trying to find an incentive to encourage schools to keep those pupils on board and get them to do as many subjects as you can persuade them to turn up and do. We don't think it has much impact on the languages, but just wanted you to be aware of that. But there is an insidious little but that I just wanted to highlight to you, that for these people with low prior attainment, they're proposing to adjust the starting point just for pupils with EAL. And our point is, why is it just EAL? Why not do a full contextual value added? Why not take into account things like gender, disadvantage, etc., etc.? Why pick out EAL as the factor? René will pick this up later. Again, quite an apparently technical point, but it's one I think it is also worth just pushing back a bit on. And there are some additional measures that are being introduced, which I don't think will have any impact on model languages. So these are the remaining questions that are in the consultation. If you have views about that EAL bit, you could put it into question 16 or question 21. And now I'd like to pass back to René to give a summary and to talk about how the ALL response can come together and how you can contribute to that. So over to you, René. Can you unmute yourself, or?
Okay, that's brilliant.
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for taking us through this and taking us through this proposal in such a depth. So what we are proposing with the ALL response is that members have got the opportunity to contribute in various forms. Obviously, in a minute, we're opening up for a Q&A, and we'll take your views and we'll take notes of those that may already fit in. But also, we've put, as in previous consultation, a brief survey together that focuses on a number of the questions to allow us to really get into your insight into some of the questions. We've chosen those questions where we think we can make the biggest impact in terms of telling a narrative, a convincing narrative as well, and giving evidence to basically why certain things should be potentially changed. And we'll give you a link in a minute on the next slide. I think what's really important for us, however, is, as I said earlier, that every single person is invited and encouraged to submit response. As part of the survey, we have also included a section with 2 questions about early indications of changes to curriculum choice and potential impact of some of the practical implications to options, but also uptake in future. We've decided that in question 15, I think it's question 21 actually instead of 22, we can be adding in a contextual information about what the impact on uptake is likely to be because of the decisions that have been made up to now. And obviously in our monthly update meetings or catch-up meetings with the Department of Education, will be showcasing some of that data from time to time as well. In terms of the EL learners, one of the concerns that has been emerged and also widely discussed at amongst some colleagues at the conference is the whole notion around the multicultural nature of our student body and multilingual student body as well, and whether actually that multilingual aspect becomes in that kind of new EL approach of disadvantaging EL or reducing ultimately the ability for EL students to show progress by adjusting their starting measure, key stage 2 upwards, could actually negatively impact the multilingual community, but also language progression over time if they decide to progress with the language. And we know that the number of EL learners progress either with their own language or with a second language moving forward. So this is something we want to explore in follow-up meetings with our DfE links in more detail as well. So I think at this stage, we can stop the recording.
May I just stop sharing for a moment?
Yeah.
And then I can stop the recording. Sure, yes, I